Hello, ladies and gentlemen. One more time, we spin the block, myself and one Spencer Kite, here to fill in for our joyous leader, Mr. One Ian O'Neill, who unfortunately is unable to join us today. So I am sat in his seat and Spencer is sat in mine. Today we are here to break down the UFC Fight Night card, Amanda Lemos versus Verna Jandiroba, hosted in the UFC Apex. And it's very much that type of card, really. I'll just do the bit of the layup, and then we'll stop complaining. The bit of the layup is, for a long time we've talked about tiering. You've talked about tiering. Here at SevereMMA, we've talked about tiering, and frankly, the tiering is really, really, really on show in this specific fight night, and it feels like the months of July / the beginning of August has sort of shown us everything that we need to know about the UFC's tiering system. So we had the UFC, I think it was 303, and that for the most part was an absolutely fantastic card, sort of top to bottom. It was enjoyed relatively well by almost all sectors of the MMA community. We then come out of that and we have a week's break, which was obviously very well received. And then we went into a Rose Namajunas versus Tracy Cortez card, which on paper was good, in practice was good. And then we now sort of lump ourselves with this Apex show. And that tiering is pay-per-view. Obviously, we're going to pull out some stops. We're going to try and make the card good. We then go out to the arena in Denver and we sell out the show, and that means we're going to pull out some stops, not all the stops, not main card, pay-per-view, these sorts of stops, but we're going to pull out some stops. And then we get an Apex card, which is a bunch of fellas that the UFC either don't know where to place, need to just place somewhere because contractual obligations are a thing in MMA, and the UFC Apex is extremely cheap to run a show in. Let's move on specifically from the tiering, and we'll jump straight into the fight card itself. So headline, Amanda Lemos versus Verna Jandiroba. There are some title implications there. We'll get to that in just a moment. Our co-main event is Brad Tavares versus Jun Young Park. Sure. Steve Garcia will fight Sungwon Choi in the 145-pound division. Kurt Hollabaugh will fight Kainan Krachewski. Cody Durden, Bruno Silva is a great fight at 125. Difficult to make a bad fight at 125. Dooho Choi returns once again against Bill Algeo. That will probably be an interesting something for the 145-pound fight that opens up the main card. Haider Amil versus Jeong Young Lee is a fight that you are interested. We'll get to that shortly. Brian Kelleher returns versus Cody Gibson, which is probably the right style of matchmaking for both of those guys at this point in their career. Miranda Maverick takes on Dion Barbosa. Loic Rajabov is back against Trey Ogden. That's an interesting fight at 155. Luana Carolina versus Lucy Podolova is a fight that will occur at some point on a card in the UFC Apex at the 135-pound limit. And then we have Muhammad Usman is opening up our fight card against Thomas Peterson. So, main event. Let's not talk necessarily about the way we feel about the card, but feel free to start with there if you wish. Amanda Lemos, Verna Jandiroba, what do you think?
I like the fight. It's the right fight for each of them at this point in where they are. Verna Jandiroba has won, I believe, 3 straight fights. She's on the ascent. She's beaten good competition thus far, beat Lupi Godinez last time out, merits a step up in competition. And that is what Amanda Lemos is. Fought for the title last summer, didn't go her way, comes back, gets a victory over Mackenzie Dern last time out to get herself moving in the right direction again. She is the established top 5 fighter in the division. Jandiroba is looking to prove that she is a legitimate threat in the division. This is perfect matchmaking. This is exactly what I want to see for each of these women at this stage of their career. I couldn't love it anymore. It's classic striker versus grappler. It's 2 women from similar backgrounds and upbringings in Brazil battling it out on the biggest stage. I talked to Jandiroba ahead of this fight. She is so proud of that fact that they're here getting to showcase something for their country at this level, the highest stage in the sport, the main event, battling in the top 5, battling potentially for a championship opportunity. I love that stuff. I'm always going to be in on that stuff. And then there's the rest of the card.
There is the rest of the card. I think my specific thoughts on this is Amanda Lemos. We have seen some progression in her over the last little while, where previously we'd see a big bunch of gas expulsion in the first round, plenty on every single one of those very, very, very vicious shots that she likes to throw. And then as we sort of progress through those 3-round fights, we would see that would slow and slow and slow and slow. We've seen now that she could take some of that Trevor Whitman advice that we so lovingly talk about all the time, and has been able to implement that into her fights in more recent history. And then Virna Jandiroba is somebody I've been pretty high on her entire UFC career. Losing to Carla Esparza is a thing that happens. Mackenzie Dern, again, is a thing that happens when you're Virna Jandiroba and all you're trying to do is grapple. It is a thing that can happen that you lose to Mackenzie Dern. And then Amanda Ribas, sometimes Amanda Ribas turns up and is just a phenomenal fighter, and sometimes she turns up and she's absolutely not a phenomenal fighter, and it's very, very difficult to judge who you're going to get at any one time. But wins over Angela Hill, wins over Marina Rodriguez, and Lupita Godinez are just three phenomenal wins, in my opinion. Like, absolutely phenomenal wins. Angie Hill in a good run of form. Marina Rodriguez, obviously, perennial title contender. And then Lupi Godinez is somebody that you and I have been high on for a long, 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 long time. It feels as though, 36 years of age, so we have to start moving in the same way that Lemos 37 have to start moving. It is something that Virna Jandiroba has started to come into her own. She's starting to blend the striking a little better with the grappling. She's able to ride out some of these performances in ways and in spots that she wasn't able to previously. And so it's a great test for both women in that, as you say, if Lemos gets taken down, we know that she could do things off her back, but Jandiroba is a fantastic black belt. And in the same vein, Jandiroba, we know, has work available for her on the feet, big left hooks, big right straights, these sorts of things. But we know where she wants to get the fight, and that's to the ground. So specifically, I think that, it's going to be interesting for as long as it lasts. I'm not necessarily sure we see all 5 rounds. It feels as though it could be one of those fights where one woman is going to be able to find the spots that she wants to be in. If, let's say, Jandiroba gets a takedown in the first round, she's like, cool, I know I can get this fight down, and so I'm going to continue going to that well. And in the same vein, if Lemos stuffs the takedowns and is able to get to Jandiroba, able to work her way to the inside, it may be that we start to see, an unraveling of Virna Jandiroba as well. Can you speak slightly towards the potential title implications that both of these women have with a win here?
So I think it's greater for Virna Jandiroba simply because Amanda Lemos fought for the title not quite a year ago. But when you look at the strawweight division, and I have the rankings up in front of me, number 1 is Tatiana Suarez, who I think, if she were healthy and active, would unquestionably be next in line and fighting for a title in her very next fight. She can't stay healthy. She's not active enough. And even though she's coming off another good win last time out, I believe the last fight was the Jessica Andrade fight. I'm going to pull that up now just to try to find this. If you could beat me to it, that would be great. But you then go down the rest of the rankings. Yan Xiaonan fought for the title. Amanda Lemos fought for the title. Jessica Andrade fought for the title. That brings it to Jandiroba. Marina Rodriguez hasn't been able to clear that hurdle. And then we're on down to a bunch of other fighters that haven't been able to clear that hurdle. And so we know Zhang Weili is kind of rounding into due to fight in the back half of the year at some point. And so if Jandiroba can go out and get a 4 straight win, beating a former title contender, title challenger, if she does it in impressive fashion, I think it absolutely opens the door for her to fight Zhang Weili sometime in October, November, December as the second title fight on a pay-per-view, and it will 100% be merited. Now, if Tatiana Suarez can get healthy, maybe get another fight in, then she can certainly put herself back in that mix. But right now, it feels like there's an open door. And certainly if Amanda Lemos comes out and wins a second fight this year and sparks Virna Jandiroba and shows that there's levels to this and she's not even close to being on my tier and I am absolutely here for this, then maybe you could make a case. We've seen a bunch of championship fights get run back relatively quickly, even when they haven't necessarily needed to be, just because of the supply and demand of it all. And so if there's no one else around that's in that position, there's the potential for it to happen. And so to me, this is a big stakes fight at the top of a low stakes card.
It is a low stakes card, and we're now at the portion of that low stakes card where we look on out into the abyss of the other 11 fights. And I'll just run through, and we can pick the fights that we've sort of alluded to having an interest in. Brad Tavares, Jun Yong Park. Look, Brad Tavares is a fighter that has been around the UFC forever. He has amassed a number of performances in the UFC. It feels as though he has not been able to keep up with the consistent movings of the technical proficiency that happens, regardless of whether you're at 185 or not.
You're trying to be nice. He's the same fighter today that he was when he came off the Ultimate Fighter, because Brad was very content being sound defensive wrestler and try to kickbox you.
Yes, that. Yes. Yeah. In his last 4, we're 1-3. Losses to bad loss to Gregory Robocop Rodriguez. Beats Chris Weidman, beats the ghost of Chris Weidman, loses to Bruno Silva in just a horrific knockout, and then loses a unanimous decision to Dricus du Plessis. Before then, we're looking way back at 2021 for a win. We're looking at Omari Akhmedov, and we're looking at Shoeface. It's certainly looking like the end of Brad Tavares' career, or at least we're in that epoch of his career. I think the matchmaking at Jun Yong Park, Jun Yong Park is somebody that is still hungry in this division to cement a place in a ranking. He is solid enough that he hits hard enough. He looks like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and he embraces that sort of an aspect to him. It's not going to be a great fight, I don't think. It certainly doesn't have any title implications. Has a little bit of divisional relevancy here, but I struggle to see. Look, if Brad Tavares is able to dissuade Jun Yong Park and is able to bat away some of the aggressiveness and athleticism of Jun Yong Park, then we could see Jun Yong Park take another L and Brad Tavares spin the block on the win column. But I don't see it. Thoughts?
I mean, I think this is mostly a fight where we figure out kind of once and for all where Jun Yong Park is. He was on a 4-fight winning streak. He loses a questionable split decision to Andre Muniz last time out at the end of last year. That sort of stunts his momentum, and now he's getting that reset, right? Muniz was sort of the win and you're in the top 15, and then we get some bigger opportunities. Now we get the reset potential. I thought he won that fight against Andre Muniz. A bunch of people online, if you go to MMAdecisions.com, felt that same way as well. And so this should be, if he is somebody that, in the relatively shallow middleweight division, is somebody that's capable of making a late career run of things, this should be a fight where he goes out and he smashes Brad Tavares. And so we see what happens. Brad Tavares is at the Jim Miller stage of life. If you want to stick around and you want to keep competing, we're going to need to scale it back a little bit, because these guys that are even in the second 15 at middleweight are getting to be too tough and too strong and too powerful for you at this stage of your career. It's been a very good run. He is such a respected dude. He is one of the leaders in the room at Extreme Couture. He is one of the people that inspired guys like Dan Ige and Punahele Soriano to come to Vegas and move to Vegas and chase this dream. But he's at the end of his rope, more or less, in the UFC. He's in the very much twilight of his career, coming off of the Ultimate Fighter, I think season 12. So we've been doing this. He's been here for a minute. So this one to me is all about Jun Yong Park, and we'll see where he fits after Saturday.
Definitely. Steve Garcia and Seung Woo Choi will fight at 145. Fair play to both men. Kurt Holliber and Kainan Krachewski will also fight at 155 pounds. Fair play to both of them. You have an interest in Bruno Silva, Cody Durden. Do you want to just extrapolate on those thoughts a little moment?
Sure. Bruno Silva is a guy to me that he would be in the mix at flyweight if he stayed active. He comes into this on a 3-fight winning streak, a 3-fight run of performance of the night bonuses for stopping JP Bays, Victor Rodriguez, and Tyson Nam. Now, certainly those are not world-beating efforts, but when you go out and you stop guys at featherweight, at flyweight, where we don't necessarily get a ton of finishes, especially TKO finishes, you have my attention. The problem is that the JP Bays Victor Rodriguez fights took place all the way back in 2021. He then goes 2 years without a fight, comes back, chokes out Tyson Nam, who is a respected veteran, and then disappears for another year. So, like, what are we doing here? I want to see him back. Every time I go to matchmake the flyweight division, he's a name that pops up for me as like, ooh, that would be a good fight. But I don't know if he's active. I don't know if we're ever going to see him again. He's not a young fella, and it's a division where the older you get, the tougher it is going to continue to be, because young, quick, fast, athletic dudes are coming along at an alarming pace. But this feels like one of those good matchups where Cody Durden, we know what he is. He's going to come out. He's going to wrestle. He's going to look to grit and grime and use conditioning and kind of put it on you. It's always hilariously fitting to me that he is from Covington, Georgia, because he gives me very Colby Covington vibes. And so I just want to see if Bruno Silva can A, keep this run going, and B, turn it into we see him again in 4 months rather than 4 years.
Yeah, I doubt it, because we haven't so far.
Right. History tells us he's going to win this fight and disappear for at least 15 months.
Indeed. Somebody that is returning after disappearing for a little while is Doo Ho Choi. He fights Bill Algeo. At this point, do we have any thoughts on Doo Ho Choi? Do we have any interest in the Doo Ho Choi train?
My thoughts on Doo Ho Choi is that his career was irreparably shifted the night he fought Cub Swanson in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. That has subsequently been immortalized in the UFC Hall of Fame. He is winless since then. Obviously, his mandatory military service provides some sort of pause in his career that sort of stunts things a little bit as well, which is kind of unfortunate. He is a guy to me that I was at his UFC debut in Austin, Texas against Juan Puig. It was amazing. Right away, I was like, sign me up for this guy. Pushed a little too far, too fast, too soon, thrown in against the guy in Cub Swanson. They get into a hellacious battle. He hasn't been the same since. In his first fight after his military service, he comes in and gets Jeremy Stephens, which is just another nightmare fight where Jeremy Stephens does Jeremy Stephens things. Then it's Charles Jourdain at home, sort of after a couple of years off, or a year off, I think, almost 2 full years off in Busan, South Korea. Just a guy that is just like, when it was good at the start, it was great, but it became, we tried to do too much, and then injuries and mandatory military service took away some of what he was good at, and now he's just a shell of himself. And I feel bad that we never saw the absolute best version of the Korean Superboy.
I think I agree. I'm gonna stop at you again at Haider Emil and Jeong-Yong Lee. Do you want to just extrapolate some thoughts out? Obviously, this is the prelim headliner, so the UFC knows that this means something, right? There is a little bit of a spotlight shone on both of these athletes. Do you want to give some spiel about specifically why we should pay attention to these athletes?
So for me, it's just a couple of guys that are coming off solid performances in their debut. They come off UFC shoulder programming that I cover. So obviously I'm a little bit more aware of them and familiar with them. Haider Emil won a contract last year off the Contender Series in an absolute like knockdown, drag out battle of attrition against, his name is escaping me right now. Emra Sonmez is his name. Then comes out, gets a TKO win over Fernie Garcia, who stepped in on short notice in his debut. He's undefeated. He trains with Gilbert Melendez and that crew out at the El Nino Training Center. He fought good competition on the regional circuit. And so older guy that kind of understands now is the time, similar to what we spoke about at various points with Verna Jandiroba and on the breakdown show, recapping Denver about a few athletes. And then Jeong-Yong Lee is part of this South Korean contingent that is coming along through the road to UFC programming, 28 years old. Looked good in his debut against Blake Bilder, had won the road to UFC competition the year before. And so just a guy that, let me see what we get. Let me see more development. This is his second fight of the year after a year away between winning the competition and facing Blake Builder. Blake Builder is a reasonable win to me. It's a good first win in the UFC. Let's see if we get some progression. There's a lot of talent coming out of South Korea right now. Let's see where Jung Young Lee fits in that collection.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Brian Kelleher and Cody Gibson are going to fight. We sort of mentioned at the top of this when we were doing the quick run through that I think that's good matchmaking for both of those fighters. Both of those fighters, obviously, moving towards the end of their careers, respectively. Miranda Maverick, Dion Barbosa. Obviously, Miranda Maverick was due to fight Tracy Cortez. Tracy Cortez gets rebooked, and so we are where we are. This looks to be a Miranda Maverick stomping. I would expect it to be nothing short of that. Loic Radzhabov versus Trey Ogden. I like this fight in that Loic Radzhabov is a decent enough fighter. Trey Ogden fights well at his length. I'm more interested to see the Radzhabov side of this fight, but Trey Ogden certainly can do some of the fighting things. Luana Carolina, Lucy Podilova, and Muhammad Usman, Thomas Peterson round us out. Do we have any specific fights on that prelims outside of Haider Emil and Jung Young Lee that you would like to highlight, Sir Spencer?
For me, it's just Miranda Maverick. You mentioned that she's sort of the loser in all of this that transpired over the last couple of weeks of Tracy Cortez bumping in against Rose Namajunas. That was supposed to be a fight for her where she's then fighting up in the rankings against somebody on a nice winning streak. So I'm curious to see both what her resolve is like after being put in that position we spoke about on the breakdown where Jasmine Jasudavicius could have had a banana skin, could have been a trap fight. Now she gets Diani Barbosa, who is 1-0 in the UFC, coming off the Contender Series last year. Her debut win wasn't a particularly good fight. This is very much a fight that Miranda Maverick should win, should dominate after being set for a fight that was really competitive and really interesting. So I just want to see how she holds on to that. She's done very well since her loss out here in Vancouver last summer to Jasmine Jasudavicius, where she got hit in the eye and couldn't see, bounced back right away, got a win over Priscilla Cachoeira, got another good win over Andrea Lee last time out. And so is Miranda Maverick finally starting to round into and move forward in that form that we've kind of always expected of her after several years now, or several camps rather, of working with Elliot Marshall in Denver, getting acclimated literally and figuratively to that situation? Can she come out and have the dominant performance that on paper it looks like she should have?
Agreed. I'm more interested in, for me, from Miranda Maverick, just to sort of wrap that bit up, I'm more interested in seeing what happens after this fight, right? I'm more interested to see, she's still young in her career, still lots and lots and lots of development time. It's more interesting as to whether what happens after this is the culmination of skills that we're discussing, right? Is it that as we start to put this together, as she starts to round out who she is there, when that the sort of foundational level is set, can we then start to add some extra bolts on, or are we where we are, right? Are we coming in, there were the three prospects. There were Erin Blanchfield, Miranda Maverick, and Macy Barber, right? And they've all over the time sort of settled as to where they should be, right? Erin Blanchfield way, way, way up the top of the division. Macy Barber somewhere creeping up towards that, and Miranda Maverick slightly lower down than that and still waiting to sort of creep up that division. I think this is a unfortunate moment for her in that she gets rebooked in a fight that was going to be fantastic. We get to where we are, and this is one of those where you just have to truck through this lady, right? You go out, you dominate this lady, you prove. I understand why this had to be rebooked for me, but this is what happens when this sort of level comes in, right? And then you go out and you call for whoever it is you call for. What we will be calling is the end to this podcast. This was a very, very brief skip through a card that frankly is not great. Doesn't look great on paper. We can hope that on the night the card delivers. This is something that we do see semi-regularly, is that sometimes we don't like the look of cards on paper, but the matchups are competitive on the night and we get to see some good performances. So, fair play to the athletes in advance for any good performances. And Spencer, go.
And listen, the heavyweight fight is starting the night, not starting the main card. So we get the slog out of the way right out of the chute.
We absolutely do. We can, and I also just one one positive thing on the card. It's 12 fights. It's the right way to do it. No need for 14, 15 fight cards.
There was only 12 in Denver, and it was beautiful.
10 to 12.
Apparently, there's only going to be 10 at the Sphere in September. Like, we might be getting back around to 10 to 12 being the number instead of 13 or 14.
It sounds amazing. Well, one more time, thank you very much for joining me, Mr. Spencer Kite. You can catch him on either of the triptych of websites that he donates his time and efforts to, and that is Sportsnet, Fighters Only, and UFC.com. You can also find him on Instagram and the Twitters at Spencer Kite. And you can follow me, if you really need to, at BJJ_Harry Powell, either on Instagram or Twitter. Until next time, thank you so much for your time. We will see you again soon.